Do you think that production and all work suddenly ended on this show November 22nd of 2023, 13 months ago? A show that is not coming out until halfway through 2025. There's a lot more work on this show that's been done since then. A lot more work on this show still to come before it comes out in 4 to 6 months, whenever the hell the release date is. This figure is going to be maybe $800 million for 2 seasons of Andor by the time this is done. This is Disney's Rings of Power. Andor is Disney's Rings of Power. Renegade Online. Just for clarity, the story originated, obviously, with Caroline Reed over at Forbes magazine, who's been following this. We've charted the Acolyte, which the count is still ongoing. Andor, the count is still ongoing, and that's the key here. Disney has revealed, based on their financial filings in the UK, that the total spend so far for Andor, which is Season 1 and what we have recorded thus far for Season 2, $645 million. This is insanity. This is pure insanity. Disney has lost their mind on a lot of things. This might be one of the worst. I don't care what people think about Andor, if you like it or if you don't. Doesn't matter to me one damn bit. That's not the problem here. The problem here is that basically nobody watched this show. This was the worst performing show on Disney Plus up until The Acolyte, I think, which actually might have done a little bit better than Andor, if memory serves, because people watched it because it was so insanely bad. But Skeleton Crew, again, still nowhere to be found on the ratings. For good reason. Nobody cares about Star Wars. Star Wars is a dead franchise. It is an absolutely 1,000% dead franchise. Star Wars is done. Done as a viable commodity. Disney has murdered it. It's over. I don't care about the Mando movie. That's going to fail. Skeleton Crew, failing. Andor Season 2, going to fail. I don't care how good people think that the first season was. The first season drew basically one of the most paltry levels of viewership for Disney Plus that ever was, for a major piece of IP, for a major original show. Okay? I'm not talking about comparing it to some Mickey Mouse Clubhouse Christmas special or whatever. I'm talking about for a major piece of live action IP, Andor was bottom of the barrel in terms of viewership. But Valiant, it was good. It doesn't matter. When you're spending $300 million to produce it, you're talking about like Rings of Power level stupid. Which Rings of Power brought in, as bad as that show was, Rings of Power brought in scores more viewers than did Andor. Scores. And yes, Amazon Prime spent over $1 billion putting that show together for Season 1. Yes, that's a lot more than Andor. But again, a lot of those costs wound up getting amortized over several seasons. You're still talking about an obnoxiously, ridiculously high amount of budget. Stranger Things Season 4 would have had, if you broke it down by episode, a very similar budget to what Andor did. House of the Dragon had a very similar budget per episode for what Andor did. Although it was still, as best we can tell, a little bit cheaper. And don't forget that typically an episode of Stranger Things is at least an hour long. An episode of House of the Dragon is at least an hour long. A Rings of Power episode was about an hour long. When's the last time you saw a Disney Star Wars show that had an average episode runtime of an hour? You're lucky if you get 30 to 45 minutes. So especially when it comes to actual finished runtime, completed principal photography, when you break it down minute by minute, What Disney spends to do these shows is absolutely outrageous. It is criminally stupid. And the fact that it's still continuing after we were assured by Herr Iger that it wouldn't be so anymore is amazing to me. And I realize that this show was greenlit a little ways back, but not that much of a little ways back. Matter of fact, this would have been greenlit back in, 22? The first Andor premiered in 22. They had talked about making it a multi-season show, but they could have cacked it after season 1 with the pitiful viewership that it did. But for whatever reason, Disney felt like, hey, people like this show, let's keep going. Unfortunately, they didn't rein in the budget. So here's the skinny on this. Check out the article at Forbes. And Caroline Reed always rolls it back. She goes back to the beginning. She treats every article as if nobody has ever read this type of information before. And she re-explains a lot of things. I don't want to do that here, okay? Because Caroline's articles are always very lengthy, but they're very good. They're very well researched, well documented. But this audience, I know, already knows a lot of this stuff. Andor spent $290 million, or about 232 million Great British pounds sterling, on season 1, on filming its second season. It's now ballooned to 504 million pounds, 645 million US dollars. Now, that is a gross spend. That does not include the tax credits that have come back in. From what Caroline says, this is the highest ever annual spending on a Star Wars production disclosed in Disney public filings. The staggering sum eclipses the $280 million that was spent on Star Wars The Last Jedi over the almost 11-month period to March 16th, 2019. Again, not the total spend, just the 11-month spend. Likewise, it's higher than the $243.8 million for the cost of The Force Awakens and Disney's debut entry in the sci-fi saga during the year ending November 15th, 2016. Remember, she's talking about filing periods, not the total cost. And this is where other places are kind of getting it wrong. We know because we have all the financial documents. Caroline Reed has published these things. The Force Awakens cost, the total cost that was attributed to the film production company that files its returns in the UK, that Disney owns, obviously, was $560 million for The Force Awakens. That's what was spent according to Disney's own financial records for The Force Awakens, period. Okay? She's talking about the filing period, I believe, here. That is a huge jump. That is a $350 million jump between the two filing periods. Where did this money go? And that's not all of it. This filing period, Andor is still in post-production, or it's still in production now, either in principal photography, which I think it's finished, but Andor is still months before it comes out. That means they're still working on it. This is insane. That means the $645 million that they have spent so far just getting to this point of post-production in Season 2, with Season 1 also included in it, is still insane. There's no reason that they should... 2 seasons of a TV show like this should be like $300 million total, maybe. And that's if the audience was huge and it could justify this. We're talking about more than double this. We might be 3 times this much, 2.5 times what it should cost, if we're being generous, by the time this is over. This is clinically insane. The Walt Disney Company has no guide rails up anywhere for this. I don't know what they're thinking. This show is a dead end. Literally a dead end. It dead ends into Rogue One, where everybody dies. It's in a totally different era than the Mandoverse. This is not going to set up anything or save anything. I don't know what Disney's obsession is with pissing away this kind of money on a franchise that they have already collapsed. But people over there clearly do not know what the hell they're doing. And you know what? Like I said, you can't even blame Kathleen Kennedy for this. I'm sorry, you really can't. Because at some point, her superiors like Alan Bergman and Bob Iger, they are the ones ultimately responsible for allowing this to continue. Kathleen Kennedy's retarded, Okay? Kathleen Kennedy, she has no talent. She has no skill. She's never accomplished anything of any significance in Hollywood apart from being in the right place at the right time and surrounded by very talented men who brought her to the dance, who took her and put her in the position where she is now. We've talked about this many times before. Without people like Robert Zemeckis and Richard Donner and George Lucas and Steven Spielberg and Christopher Columbus and so on and so forth and on down the line, all those movies in the 80s that Kathleen Kennedy was a part of, executive producer doesn't always mean what you think it does. Steven Spielberg and all those other guys made those movies what they are. Kathleen Kennedy just was very fortunate to be in the right place at the right time and married one of those guys, Frank Marshall. Because we've seen what kind of disaster Kennedy is when she's actually allowed to run a studio, especially one with an IP as big as Star Wars, for which she doesn't really have any respect for. She doesn't care about. Remember, Indiana Jones was Kathleen Kennedy's baby. That's the one she really cared about. Indiana Jones was the Lucas IP that she really loved. Look what she did to that. Yeah, she's a very well-accomplished and talented woman. Oh, God. So here's Andor, $645 million, another Disney Kennedy disaster. Let's look at the breakdown here Caroline gives us. This data is from 12 October 2018 when initial production was opened, green lighting, essentially, from the time the first filing report was made or when the first filing period began for Andor in the first season, principal photography, pre-production, so on and so forth, through November of 2023. That means that this figure of $645 million US pissed away on this show, that figure is stale by an entire 13 months and 3 days as of the date that I'm recording this. Do you think that production and all work suddenly ended on this show November 22nd of 2023, 13 months ago? A show that is not coming out until halfway through 2025. There's a lot more work on this show that's been done since then. A lot more work on this show still to come before it comes out in 4 to 6 months, whenever the hell the release date is. This figure is going to be maybe $800 million for 2 seasons of Andor by the time this is done. And that doesn't include a dime, not 1 penny of marketing from Disney. They still advertise these shows on Hulu, on Disney Plus, on social media, YouTube, X, Facebook, Google Ads, whatever, Amazon Prime. This is Disney's Rings of Power. Andor is Disney's Rings of Power, but with even a more pitiful audience than Rings of Power. Like somehow the Walt Disney Company has managed to out-Amazon Amazon when it comes to pissing money away. And that's impressive. In terms, when you compare the audience for Andor to Rings of Power and then the budgets, if you did the ratios, you're talking about, Rings of Power set records for Amazon Prime. It still was significantly less than House of the Dragon. I think the audience for Rings of Power was something like half of that or less than half of that of House of the Dragon on HBO Max, which had a tiny fraction of the budget, like literally 1/4 or 1/5 the budget for Rings of Power. Something obscene. House of the Dragon is the king when it comes to that. When you look at the numbers that Andor pulled in what? A third of the audience of Rings of Power? Something like that? Or half or less? And is spending a relatively similar budget? This is incredible. $645 million total spent in adjusted U.S. dollars here. Pre-tax loss, I'll explain this again to everybody. Pre-tax loss, $129 million. This is a figure that the studio like Disney will calculate, saying that we expect, based on estimates of what we spent, where we spent it, who we spent it on, and the UK film tax laws, the film tax credit laws in the UK, we expect that we're going to get about $129 million US dollars back, of course, in Great British pounds. We're going to get $129 million back of film tax credits from the UK government. And that's what they got. The net profit of $107,000. These film production companies are financially built from an accounting perspective to basically be zero balance accounts, right? Ideally, at the end of the day, you want your profit and loss, okay? Or you want your profit here to basically be as close to zero as you can mathematically calculate to get to with your estimated film tax credit return. The reality is, if you look here, right, so you take the $129 million out, so that means that out of pocket, Disney came out of pocket $514 million US dollars at this point for Andor. That's the net. The net. The reality is that the Walt Disney Company still spent, regardless of the film tax credit. What did it cost to produce this show? Well, up until November 23rd or 22nd of last year, 2023, this show had cost from season 1 and all the way through whatever portion of season 2 they had gotten through at that point. Disney had spent, it cost $645 million to do. That's disgusting. And no, these film production companies do not, by law, may not include marketing costs. It is strictly production only. And the marketing costs wouldn't come from the FPC anyway. The marketing costs would come from Disney itself. And the way these work is basically they create this entity. This entity has the full faith and backing and credit of the Walt Disney Company. The Walt Disney Company, of course, has giant lines of credit in various countries throughout the world where they, let's say, do business like film movies. So when they do this stuff in the UK, the Walt Disney Company will call up on its line of credit at, say, HSBC or Barclays Bank or Lloyd's of London or whomever or whatever. And Disney will say, all right, the production entity will say, hey, we expect $50 million of expenses this month for pre-production or for the next 3 months. So Disney, you need to infuse us with $50 million. So Disney draws $50 million from its line of credit or 50 million British pounds, whatever the case, wherever they're doing it, and they infuse it into this entity. Effectively, this is how this rolls. Lucasfilm and Pixar and Disney Animation, they do not have a petty cash account sitting around of their own money that they go throwing in to do their own stuff. No, all of this is, that's why, like, you had the Acolyte, you had Blue Stockings Limited in the UK, and you had Blue Stockings LLC in California, and a guy like Carlos Gomez, who is the Walt Disney Company treasurer. He is the chief financial officer of that Blue Stockings film production entity in California, which owns the one in, or effectively owns the one in the UK. Because the treasurer, Carlos Gomez, is the one that has access to all of these lines of credit. He's the one that can cut the checks to make these productions happen. Once his bosses, the other folks at Disney, the people that he sits next to, the Bob Igers, or his counterparts on the studio side, Alan Bergman in this case, tell him, hey, Carlos, we've greenlit this. Bob Iger signed off on it. This is how much money we've greenlit this project for. Gomez makes sure the funds from Disney or its lines of credit get to this film production company to make it happen. That's how this works. So, but this is just still stunning to me. And it's, here's the thing. It is hitting Deadline. Like, nobody can ignore this anymore, how ridiculous. This is from Deadline magazine. This is from today. And they talk about Caroline Reed's article here. Production on the 2-season run of Disney Lucasfilm's Andor will end up costing far more than the big screen finale of the franchise's most recent trilogy. The production cost of Andor Season 2 alone, which Forbes pegs at $290 million, so far, there's no way this is not over $400 million right now. There's no way. It's been 13 months since then. And to be fair, it's hard to say. Who knows how much of that $290 million between the reporting periods, some of that still may have been attributed to Andor Season 1. But even still, it doesn't matter if $50 million or $100 million of that was still from Andor Season 1. We're still talking about stupid numbers for no audience. They're saying this is more than the production cost of Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker, Palpatine, in 2019, which Deadline pegged at $275 million. Deadline, with all due respect, your numbers were completely wrong. And we know that factually because of the very young lady that you're citing in this article from Forbes. We know exactly what Disney spent on the rise of Palpatine. It was $516. Last I saw, 520, about $520 million on that turd. Not 275. Y'all were literally off by half. Just about half. Production delays, of course, cost money. Andor Season 2 hiatus also means that the entire Season 2 production cost is not captured in the UK filing, which covers only 2023. Since the show resumed shooting in 2024 January and wrapped in February, the actual production total for the show will be higher. Also adding to the show's bottom line cost will be post-production outlays, which are not included in the 2023 accounting. Here's the point. Everything I just told you is right. Everything we've been saying has been right on the money. We're looking at a show that for 2 seasons is easily going to be in excess of $800 million. And I didn't know until I read that they had to go back and they were still shooting more in January and February after that reporting period. Meaning, in other words, virtually none of the post-production work had yet been done. And the show still doesn't come out for several more months. So let's add $200 million. We're at $850 million. Maybe going to get close to $900 million. Gross cost. But Valiant, they get some tax credits back. I don't care. We're not talking about that. We're talking about what they actually spent to make the show happen, not even including marketing. This is insane. And where are the Disney shareholders? Where are the Disney stockholders? Where is the outrage right now? Caroline Reed and Forbes have been doing tremendous jobs out there. And we have been out there for a long time telling people that this is all a bunch of crap. Yes, I'm going to play it again.
Is Mickey Mouse about to lose his house? It seems woke Disney fairy tales equal low ticket sales. Box office analysis of Disney's last 8 studio releases show a shocking loss of nearly $1 billion. That's almost a lawsuit. That's according to a number crunch by prominent YouTuber Valiant Renegade, who argues that many of Disney's recent so-called hits barely broke even or flat out tanked.
Thank you to him and Fox News again. I know that started putting pressure on Disney, and these things from Forbes as well is doing that. There is no excuse for this. There is no reason for the next earnings call in February to have a Q&A session and not have questions about this kind of thing. How are you spending $400 million to shoot a season of a show that the first season basically was one of the worst performing things ever, if not the worst performing thing ever on Disney+? How do you justify $400 million for a season 2? This is outrageous. Netflix would never do this. Netflix wouldn't do it if it was $200 million. I know, because they've done it in the past. There were shows I really liked on Netflix. Didn't get the audience. They canceled them because they were too expensive. And they weren't even anywhere near as expensive as this. Well, we can't shoot The Acolyte season 2 because the audience wasn't there. The audience wasn't there for Andor. The hell are you thinking? Make sure you're subscribed to Valiant Renegade and join us every Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern for the live show.